Watch closely as you see the man on the left-hand side by the portaloo punched by police, and then Stuff put up a notification over the video to hide the eye gouging. Look at that, right there. They purposefully hide police brutality and make it look like it was him. This is the uncut footage where they haven't covered it. This is the footage everyone should have seen. See here, he's pushed by police. He has his phone in his hand, his arms are locked behind him, and the officer is eye gouging him, deep eye gouging him and punching him with the other hand. That's what Stuff were trying to hide from their videos, from the public. And people think the protesters are violent. This is one of the only people that was arrested that day, and look at the deep eye gouge that the officer gives him. You cannot say that if there were only 3 arrests that day and one of them was this guy, that all the protesters are angry and violent and military action is called upon for them.
Put your arms behind your back, and you're resisting, and I couldn't move my arms because I was on top of my arm and they were pinning on top of me. So it was a bit brutal. It was just uncalled for, I think.
Mate, look at you, it's deeply uncalled for. No violence, no one needs to get hurt.
No one needs to get hurt.
You are defending graphene oxide in your body. You are defending graphene oxide in your body.
We can see that, bro! There's a lot on camera! You can't win the thing.
We want to see your faces. We want to see your faces. We want to see your faces. Every one of you.
We're all 10 minutes. Protect the New Zealand police. Scumbag! Scumbag! New Zealand's watching, bro! New Zealand's watching! The police are crushing them! The police are crushing people against Portaloo! How dare you! How disgusting!
And there's the man over there. So Portaloo Phil's just asking the officer what's happening. Obviously it's past 10 AM, so we're just wondering what's going on, and the officer's just informed Phil that he will most likely be seen from this side. Brandon. Hey Phil, any idea how long we've got until you get your...
I was looking at
Say.
the board up there and it said that I was due in at 9 a.m. I was told to come at 10.
Yeah.
I've already
Gold.
so I might have to wait.
So parents, she here or not? It's being called right now. Okay.
Her court date was the 3rd of March, she just told me.
Not what it says on the system.
Oh well. Okay, so may have been missed, we don't know, but
I
you were
don't
clearly
know.
told 10 a.m. to be
Yeah,
here,
I was
so...
told 10, so I was expecting 10. If I was told 9, I certainly missed it. I should have been there.
Yeah.
I was quite disappointed when I saw it rolling up on the screen at the back
Yeah.
there.
So are we able to get clarification from anyone, do you think? No.
Laura Casson.
They just say, wait till you
No.
prove.
No parents.
Alright, no worries. Okay, well hopefully that happens soon.
Yeah, I was surprised. I didn't know that Brandon he showed me before, and I was like, oh, you need to just tell people about it.
Yeah.
The damage to his head and everything was...
But that was from a separate incident.
Yeah, it was from a
Yeah.
separate incident, but they treated him so well in the police, and now he says this, he's really disappointed because,
Yeah.
you know, all his experience, like just about all my experiences with police up until now have been really positive.
Yeah.
Everything they raid in my house and everything, they were really sweet to me, they were always nice.
The respect was always there, and
Yeah.
now a little bit of that has gone out the window
Yeah.
with a select few.
With a select
few officers,
this
yeah.
guy around the corner, CP26, you should go out for an image of him. It's a piece of work. Yeah.
All good, my friend. Now, did I put down my coffee somewhere? I did have a coffee jar.
You should be very careful with what you do. It's hot. There's apparently 4 charges against me now. I'm only aware of 1 charge. So 3 charges have been and they have contacted me about them. My bail condition is not to incite violence against that lease.
That is strange. I'm not sure how to respond to that one.
I'm not sure
Since it was pretty obvious from the footage that you were not inciting any violence whatsoever. Very obvious. It was quite the opposite, in
Well, I
fact.
tell you what, I talked to a senior sergeant this morning and he almost condoned what happened to me, saying, oh, you shouldn't spit at the police. I said, I never spit at the police, never have in my entire life.
What?
You know,
Accusations coming left, right and centre.
yeah. And I want to know what these other 3 charges are, so I'm waiting.
So you haven't been advised even what you've been charged with?
Yeah. How can they charge me without even contacting me about these charges? It's ridiculous. So I guess I'll find out soon. I'll tell you the interview.
Yeah, okay. Alright, thank you, Phil.
And so you're to come back to Wellington District Court on the 21st of April at 9 a.m.
The lady here has just repeated that the terms of his bail conditions are that he does not incite any violence, and she's informed him again that he is to reappear here on the 21st of April. And it looks like he's signing his bond conditions paperwork.
That will all be in your disclosure what they've charged you with.
So they dropped our bail conditions. Are they back on Parliament grounds?
I've just overheard Fubatha walking past saying they've dropped bail conditions, they are now allowed back on Parliament grounds. Again, that's just something I've overheard.
Alright, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so what you need to do is just go through, photograph all of those and get them scanned. And then go through them working as well. I'll talk to you about cooperation.
I've been charged to assault with disorderly behaviour, violence. None of these were first, none of these were on first charge.
Okay, so I've just seen Phil's paperwork, and it says that he has 4 charges. One of those is disorderly behaviour likely to cause violence. 2 of those charges are sorry, I'll just double check. 2 assaults on police, 2 charges of assaults on police, and 1 charge of resisting police. So we'll see how that goes down when he comes back to his next hearing on the 21st of April. 21st of April. Okay, so that seems to be all that you need to be here for, is that right? Are you heading back to Parliament now?
I'm going to head back and I just need to photograph all of these and get them to Alana, and
Beautiful.
Then I've got other things that I need to do today, but this is a real eye-opener that is, quite interesting that they've changed the charges.
Yes,
completely.
because initially it was just 1 charge, yeah. So these charges have changed and you haven't been advised of that until just now. Alright, well thank you Phil, and thank you for letting us share your court journey.
I've even got my criminal history there.
Oh, brilliant!
Yeah, which is, you can film that if you like. There's my criminal history. I've
just
never been convicted.
Going to cover some of the details.
Oh yes, never been convicted of anything.
Yeah, never been convicted of anything in his life, and now facing this. So, yeah, all good. Thanks Phil, we'll see you back at Parliament.
Yeah.
Alright guys.
So just so you know, I'm double vaxxed. I got vaxxed back in September and October, where my second one came in. My flatmate's brother died in early October after taking the vax, and I started to do some deep research into it, and I started to notice the stats were changing because they were using historical stats, using a base rate fallacy by putting all the deaths where there was no vaccines into the stats as unvaxxed deaths. Okay, yesterday morning the call went out to hold the line. I was on sentry at the time, it was about 6 a.m. We moved up. I'm not very much of a runner, but I jogged up to the corner of Hill Street and we went up towards Kate Shepherd Place. When I arrived there's about the same amount of protesters and police. I engaged some of the police, just having a bit of banter, and most of them seemed happy and calm, and then someone yelled out, "They're up Molesworth," so I ran down Hill Street and up Molesworth to where they had moved the barriers forward about 30 metres. When I arrived, the second barrier was just being put in place by the forklift. It seemed a bit disorganised, and I started making a call, fall back and bind up. And then other protesters, one who I'd seen and a couple who I hadn't, started calling out against me, going, "No, we're not doing that, we're not doing..." And I was like, everywhere else I've been, I'm always at the front line, and people listen when, when we're heavily outnumbered like that, and it seems strange to me. The police had about 30 there, and I was there for a few minutes trying to engage and talk to some of them, but they weren't that interested, and then the white car came up. Now, the white car came up about 50 k's, dropped right down, and then just before he hit the police had all spread, even though they were looking at us like they were expecting it, and he hit the brakes, so it made a squeal, like he was going faster than he was, when you hit the brakes really hard, and he didn't actually touch any officer as far as I could see, and then the officers surrounded the car, and like it was a staged play, instead of just taking out the driver's side window and getting in, they banged on all the windows, so all the protesters in the area were focused. Now I started falling back and shouting to the guys, "Look, fall back, bind up." And I looked over, and on the quad opposite where those bollards are now. There's a quad between the big buildings. I could see 40 officers or so coming in and in marching order with 12 or maybe 6, hard to tell. I'll say 12 people with riot shields. They weren't dressed fully in riot gear, they just had the shields. So they, as soon as I started shouting riot police, they came running and skipped our front line because there wasn't enough of us and we weren't bound up, and they ran down the footpath, and as soon as that happened I turned and I started running and yelling, get back, and we had maybe 6 of us go back. Now the guy next to me, I think his name was Dylan, big guy, like big muscly guy. Just before we got to the Portaloos, about 5 metres out on the corner of Hill and Molesworth, one of the police officers with a riot shield hit him with the shield, and he just turned around, grabbed the shield and bodily threw the man on the ground. I stopped right there and I put my hands out to make sure none of the protesters harmed the officer, and for what seemed like 5 or 10 seconds before the others arrived, but people say it was probably only 2 seconds, so it just feels a lot slower at the time. And I did stand there making sure that the officer wasn't harmed, and they hit me with the shields, but it didn't seem like they were trying to hurt me. They just pushed me back, and so they pushed me off, and I got pushed back a couple of metres towards the Portaloos, so I was about 5 to 10 metres, somewhere around that, away from the Portaloos. And I sort of said, hey man, there's no need for that, I'll fall back. And then they formed a line with the riot shields, and a senior sergeant was behind them, and he was off to the left, and as soon as he saw me, he diverted and he came straight in for me. But he was behind the shield wall and he said, get back. So I moved back, and then I got out my phone, I put it onto video, I said, you know, no need for this, and then whang, bang bang, he hit me twice overhead, I think it was overhead lefts, and here of course, and I said, hey, you know, there's no need for that, but I was trying to, oh sorry, I was using my right hand, I was trying to get their badge numbers, which were all showing on their uniform, and they pushed up against me again. Once again, the guys with the shields weren't like argy-bargy, they could have, you know, tried to hit me hard or anything, they were just pushing against me to force a line. And I get that, so I was trying to bind up with people. The only person that I managed to bind up with successfully was a 17-year-old kid, brave kid. I ended up going to the cells with him, but that kid, first ever experience of protest, and I still want to see him. If anybody knows who he is, I would love to hear from him. So that happened, then I got the guys with shields pushed on me, they parted, and that senior sergeant came in with 2 big uppercuts, trying to hit my rib region, either to win me or to break a rib, but I'm too fat for that. So they then formed up again and pushed me all the way, and he kept on saying every 10 seconds or so, move back, and then I hit the Portaloos, because I'd moved back as far as I could go, and I said, you know, this is as far as I could go, and I'm holding my camera trying to get it back into my pocket or something, and he could see that I was trying to get the camera away, and that's when he came in and he attacked me bodily through, I think it was another overhand left, and then went in and gouged my eyes with 2 thumbs, and at that stage I thought, I'm under threat here, I can't get back any further. And so I charged him. I regret charging them, but at that stage I had sustained, I've seen the video, I've sustained a minute of constant attack without throwing anything back at the guy, only acting in a passive manner and just trying to get some video of what was going on. So that's what happened. When I charged out, of course, that isolated me, they threw me to the ground. I got my arm pinned under me and they were going, give us your arm, put it behind your back, and I couldn't. I had my body weight and their body weight on top of me, and I was going, you know, let me get my arm out. And when I pulled my arm out, my phone went loose. Now, I've been told by other protesters that took video at the time, when they were cutting me off after they bound my hands behind my back, one of the officers picked up that phone. When I arrived at Wellington Central Station, and it took nearly 25 minutes because they went way out on the motorway and they took a big detour because I guess they're not from Wellington. My phone was not with my property, so the phone has been taken by the police. Sue Gray, who is representing me, asked for it back yesterday morning. We have heard nothing from the police about my phone, and that of course cripples my ability to communicate. If my mother sees this, I just want to say, Mum, I love you, and I'm sorry if you feel embarrassed, but it had to happen. And that's what happened. Yeah.
Thank you, Phil.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you so much, brother. Thank you, my bro. We appreciate you and all that you are and all that you've given, bro. I see you. I total for you, brother. Thank you for being a manatane here on the ground, man.
Oh, you know, thanks for representing and bringing our story to the world, you know. Well, we're only here for freedom. We do it in a peaceful way. And the officers out there, as I say, they're not looking to harm us.
Most of them,
the vast majority, I would say, maybe it's 2 to 5% that cause trouble. And we have our troublemakers here too, but we try and deal with them. When they make trouble, we isolate them and we either hand them in or we get them out of the line. And that's what the police should be doing too. And it's sad to see every time I see a troublemaker in the police, they're the senior sergeant calling the orders. Now, that's wrong. If your leadership is attacking the citizens of New Zealand, then your leadership is wrong. You must say no to those orders. But yeah, as I say, I've talked to so many officers over the last 14, 15 days, and by and large they are lovely people. It's only, it seems, the senior members, and I'm not talking about the older members who have been around, I'm talking about senior sergeants, the people giving the orders.
Absolutely.
And I hear you about the it's only a small percentage. I tell everyone the police are like every other belief, religion or group of people, right?
Yeah,
there's a small handful that run for the rest, right?
There's shadow and light and shadow, bro. It has to play out,
And the fact of the matter is, I hear a lot of people say, you know, cross the line, you know, quit, don't do it. Hey, that's not right.
Give and take,
These people, they have mortgages, they have families to feed. They can't just turn on all that responsibility, but you can tell they don't want to hurt the citizens. It's only a few that do, and we've got to deal with those, New Zealand. We've got to make complaints, and hey, if you're behind us and you support us and you can't get down here, write an email to your MP, whether the National Labour Act or Green. Write an email to them, write a letter to them, phone them up, put pressure on your MPs, say that this support isn't just a few thousand people in front of Parliament. We know we've got tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people nationwide supporting us because we see their financial support, but speak up. Write a letter to your MP, please.
Thanks, Phil.
So when I got charged, it was a charge against obstructing the police, sort of a nonsense charge. I got bailed to no address, so I came straight back here after I went to the hospital. When I got back, my tent mate Phil, who had been missing, we call him Fubar Phil because my name's Phil, of course, so we have to define ourselves. He tells me that 4:30 in the morning, when he was coming back to the tent, a group of officers grabbed him yelling, "We've got you, Fubar." So they knew his Twitter handle. They didn't call him Phil, they called him Fubar, and they charged him with 2 counts of assaulting a police officer. They couldn't give him a date, a time or a place where these assaults occurred. We know Phil doesn't assault people. He's purely peaceful. He holds the line, he binds up, so he's not throwing punches, he's bound to the person next to him. Anyway, they held him till 10 in the morning until I had left the hospital, and that's when he was released from custody. So they aimed at our tent. 3 people got arrested that day according to the police. That was me, my tent mate Phil, and the young 17-year-old who bound to me at the Portaloos. And we were the only 3 arrested that whole day, so that's suspicious, isn't it? Yeah. And with the white car and everything, it was like a diversion, and they gunned directly for me, and as soon as they had me in custody, people tell me who were filming, they backed up and they left. They were aiming for me alone, and I don't know what they think of me, but I think that they chose the wrong person to aim for, because it's given me a platform with people like you. I respect what you do, and thank you so much for putting it out there to the people.
Thank you, Phil.
Below is the letter I received yesterday from the IPCA, in text form only, as I couldn't work out how to post the .pdf to social media. I feel that while leaning towards believing my assailant where video wasn't available to dispute his account, the findings are fair and the IPCA have done their best to be balanced in their investigation into this. I have edited my name and some formatting issues, but will take screenshots of the original later to show no alterations have been made of the original by me. Try to keep your comments respectful, please. IPCA, 22 to 13,624. PO Box 25221, Wellington 6140 Aotearoa, New Zealand. 0800 503 728 tel, plus 644499, 2050 fax, plus 644499, 2053. www.ipca.government.nz. September 2023. Dear Mr. Peters, your complaint about police actions on February 22, 2022. Introduction. 1. I refer to the authorities' letter to your lawyer Sue Gray dated July 29, 2022, advising of our intention to investigate the complaint she made to police on your behalf on February 22, 2022. 2. As you are aware, the issues raised were also considered as part of the authorities' wider review into the policing of the Parliament protest and occupation in February/March 2022. This report, the review, Policing the Protest and Occupation at Parliament 2022, was released on April 20, 2023 and can be found at https://www.ipca.government.nz/site/parliament-protest/. 3. This letter addresses your complaint. Doubtless you will appreciate that our need to prioritize the authorities' wider review has resulted in a delay in formally concluding your complaint. You have requested that we deal with you directly, and I confirm we have not sent Ms. Gray a copy of this letter. We have simply advised her that we have finalized the matter and reported our findings to you. 4. It is not necessary to outline the background here, as this is, of course, well known to you. In brief, you complained that on February 22, 2022, an officer punched you in the head several times and gouged your eye, leaving you with facial injuries that required medical attention, and stole your phone. The authorities' investigation. 5. On July 11, 2022 you sent us an email setting out your account of what occurred. By this time, you had discovered the names of the officers involved and included these in your email. 6. On November 25, 2022 you met with authority investigator, Ian Ferguson. You explained why you attended the protest and provided a more detailed account of the incident. In summary, you said that you attended the protest from the outset on February 8, 2022 when the convoy first arrived in Wellington. You expected the protest would only last a day and had no expectation it would last as long as it did. Initially you did not stay overnight as you live in Pororua. You were not present on February 10 when police first tried to remove all the protesters. From February 11 you started to camp overnight and remained at the protest. You describe yourself as quite a big guy, so you made sure you generally were at the front of the protest lines to protect others, such as older or weaker people, from potentially getting hurt. On February 22 you had acted as night shift security between 3:00 am to 6:00 am, and at the end of your shift somebody called out that you all needed to hold the line, and so you went to the corner of Molesworth and Aitken Streets, near the portable toilets where police had started to form a line. Your aim was to ensure this area was safe and the portable toilets were protected. You saw the incident where a white car drove towards the rear of police officers holding a line. Police surrounded this car, banging on its panels and windows before removing the driver and arresting. No officers appeared to be injured. A group of officers with riot shields then started running past the protesters' front line and charged down the footpath toward the corner of Hill and Molesworth St. One of the officers tripped and fell to the ground as he ran. You said you immediately stopped and put my arms out to stop any of the protesters from getting close to the officer on the ground. A few seconds later, other officers with shields arrived and pushed you back. You attempted to bind with protesters around you, but the officers pushed you all back to within a few meters of the portable toilets. You explained that the officers were pushing the line of protesters and started yelling orders, and Sergeant Tuazeno told you to fall back. You moved back 3 to 4 meters and were in the middle of the road, not right in front of the portaloos at that stage. Officers continued to push all of the protesters and we started to get caved in, and there were people getting stranded by the portaloos. Sergeant Tuazeno tried to punch you multiple times but was inhibited by officers holding shields. Sergeant Tuazeno threw about 4 punches and managed to hit you once. After watching videos of the incident, you believe he tried to put his thumb into your eye and eye-gouge you at this point. You had never tried to grab any of the police tactical weapons or shields. You are holding your mobile phone in your right hand. You fall back and move to the right in front of the portable toilets. You turned your phone camera on to record events. Sergeant Tuazeno moved immediately in front of you and again yelled at you to fall back. You turned and indicated to him that the line could not fall back any further as it was being pressed against the portable toilets. When you turned back, Sergeant Tuazeno lunged at you and threw maybe 7 punches, hitting me with a lot of them. Then, right at the end, he pushed me up against the portaloos and gouged my eyes. After this second attack from Sergeant Tuazeno you were angry. You threw a punch at Sergeant Tuazeno and ran towards the police line. You still had your phone in your right hand and could not throw a proper punch. An officer, who you later learn is Constable Jones, hits you with a wooden pole/stick just under your ribs, which caused a welt. You were arrested and thrown down on the ground. You had your phone in your right hand, and this was underneath you. Officers yelled at you to give them your hands. You explained you couldn't as they were pinning you down. When they released pressure, you pulled out your right arm and phone. You tried to put your phone in your clothing to protect it and the recording, but it was knocked out of your hand. You believe an officer picked up the phone, gave it to Sergeant Tuazeno, who appears to stash it either down the leg of his pants or when he stands up, he puts something down in his breast. You were then taken to Wellington Central Police Station and were charged with assaulting Sergeant Tuazeno and Constable Jones, disorderly behavior, and resisting arrest. 7. A witness, Monty McAfee, complained to us about your arrest and treatment. He said he ended up being pushed by police with riot shields up against the portable toilets. To his right was a man with a grey beard wearing a cap, standing still. This was you, but he did not know you at that time. 8. To his left was a man wearing an orange fluorescent top. He said he had watched a video taken by a member of the public and it looked like the man in the orange fluorescent top was pushing out against a police officer's shield or trying to reach through to hit one of the officers. This man moved about half a meter to his right and officers started slamming people up against the portable toilets with their shields. 9. He said the protesters were stuck and couldn't go anywhere. He noticed police were directing a large amount of aggression to you on his left. The only reason he could think for this was that maybe they mistook you as the man who had lashed out at the officer. He said police were shouting at protesters non-stop, but he could not understand what they were saying. 10. He said there was a tall officer behind another shorter officer with a round shield, who was in front of you. The tall officer threw several punches at you when you were pinned up against the portable toilets. He shouted at the officer to stop and put his hands up trying to stop the officer punching you. He ended up getting pushed by officers with riot shields up against the portable toilets. He was arrested and was in the same transport van as you back to Wellington Police Station. 11. We interviewed 4 officers including Sergeant Tuazeno and Constable Jones. We also reviewed all the information police gathered during their investigation of the incident. Details will be referred to as relevant when analyzing the issues below. 12. We examined footage you provided of the incident, and other footage as part of our review of police actions during the Parliament protest and occupation. 13. The stuff footage has the best coverage of the whole incident. We set out details of what is seen on this footage and record the time through the footage when matters occur. This is not the time of day. It should also be acknowledged that the footage is a compilation of different camera views and events on the day rather than a continuous contemporaneous recording. However, the events from 3:32 to 4 o'clock are from one camera view and show events in real time. 1:45, police officers line up carrying shields. 1:53, white car drives at police lines. 2:22, some pushing and shoving between police and protesters. 2:59, 2 rows of officers holding shields run down the road and onto the footpath. Some minor altercations occur with the odd kick out at police and the odd push back with the shield occur on the way down. Protesters on the road begin running alongside police. 3:15, police and protesters face each other in front of the portable toilets and across Molesworth Street. You and Mr. McAfee are in the protest line approximately 2 meters to the west of the portable toilets. You are wearing a cap and Mr. McAfee is to your right and has long brown hair. There are struggles between protesters and police further to the west, not appearing to involve either you or Mr. McAfee. Sergeant Tuazeno is behind his staff and wearing his face mask. 3:24, Mr. McAfee and you walk along the line to the front of the portable toilets. You are about a meter out from the front of the portable toilets up close to the police line with someone appearing to push you from the rear. 3:32, you are backed against the portable toilets with Mr. McAfee to your right. Sergeant Tuazeno is behind his staff and not wearing a mask at this point. 3:35, the police line surges forward pressing you and Mr. McAfee hard against the portable toilets. Sergeant Tuazeno reaches through the police line and delivers 2 blows to the left side of your head with his right fist. 3:41, you have your left hand on the top of a shield held by the officer directly in front of you and are holding your mobile phone in your right hand. There is a hand on the front of your neck which seems to be coming from a person standing to the left and rear of you. You are pushing back against the shield. Mr. McAfee is to your right. 3:44, Sergeant Tuazeno reaches through the line with his left hand causing the officer in front of him to move to his right. You are still holding your phone in your right hand. Mr. McAfee appears to be trying to protect you from Sergeant Tuazeno. Sergeant Tuazeno's left open hand, wearing a black glove, comes into contact with your right eye area and moves in that area for 2 seconds before lowering to your cheek. Sergeant Tuazeno's thumb is under your nose. Sergeant Tuazeno's hand moves again, and his left thumb then enters your right eye area forcing your eyebrow up and your head back. You duck or move your head down as a result of the pressure to your eye, and Sergeant Tuazeno moves closer to you. This forces the officer in front to move more to his right and isolates him from the officers in the line. 3:48, Sergeant Tuazeno moves his left hand to behind your head and pulls you from the line. 3:50, you are pulled from the line by Sergeant Tuazeno, who has his left hand around the rear of your neck. You rush at Sergeant Tuazeno and have your left wrist on top of Sergeant Tuazeno's left arm. You are still holding your mobile phone in your right hand. You attempt or deliver a blow to the left side of Sergeant Tuazeno's head. 352. You move back into the line with Sergeant Tuazeno still holding the back of your neck. Sergeant Tuazeno appears to deliver several punches to your stomach region. Constable Jones is to Sergeant Tuazeno's left and holding a stick in his right hand, which he drops before grabbing you, and together with Sergeant Tuazeno, they take you to the ground. 409. Mr. McAfee is handcuffed and held by a female officer. 414. You and Mr. McAfee are escorted away under arrest. 14. Another piece of footage shows more detail when officers are running down the footpath on Molesworth Street. This shows an officer being shoulder charged to the ground by a protester who then runs off. The officer falls onto his back near the curb and you can be seen standing in line with the middle portable toilet but some distance from the officer on the ground. Police form a safe haven in front of the fallen officer with their shields, and part of this forms in front of you. You appear to put your hands up to ward off a shield. Otherwise, no aggressive or assaultive behavior can be seen. The authorities' findings. Issue 1. Was your arrest lawful? 15. You were arrested on February 22, 2022 and charged with assaulting 2 police officers, resisting police, and disorderly behavior. These charges were withdrawn in November 2022 after police prosecution reviewed the case and determined there was not sufficient evidence to substantiate the assault charges. This would in turn impinge on the charge against you for resisting arrest. The fact charges were withdrawn does not mean that your arrest was unlawful. 16. Sergeant Tuazeno was the officer who arrested you. He confirmed to us and in written documents that he arrested you for obstruction. This is an offence under Section 23 Summary Offences Act 1981 and involves a person intentionally obstructing an officer from executing their duty. 17. The duty that Sergeant Tuazeno and his colleagues were performing on February 22, 2022 was initially to support the movement of the concrete bollards. Then, after the car had driven at the line of officers and an officer had been pushed to the ground, their duty changed to pushing protesters back to allow officers to move away from this area. To obstruct police, you needed to intentionally hinder them by refusing to move back when instructed to do so. 18. At the time you are arrested, the situation is described in paragraph 13 and specifically at paragraph 13h. You initially were off to the side of the portable toilets when police start trying to move protesters back and away. You then move to the front of the portable toilets and get wedged in there with nowhere to move to. 19. Sergeant Tuazeno believes you could have moved away from the area earlier and not moved in front of the portable toilets. You advised us that you and other protesters wanted to protect the portable toilets from damage. You said police had earlier targeted this area and it was a significant resource for protesters. Police had also agreed with protesters that this area would not be crossed by police during the operation to move the bollards. Sergeant Tuazeno was not aware of this agreement. 20. Sergeant Tuazeno only needed reasonable suspicion that you had obstructed police in order to arrest you. He had that, not only for you but also for all the other protesters who did not move away from the area when instructed. It was not a general part of the police operation to arrest protesters that day but rather to try to move the concrete bollards with the minimum fuss. 21. We consider your arrest for obstruction was lawful as Sergeant Tuazeno had reasonable cause to suspect you had committed an offence of obstruction. However, your arrest was unnecessary in the sense it was not part of the police operation to arrest protesters and is hard to understand as you were not doing anything different from all the protesters around you. Indeed, another police officer described you as behaving like all the others and refusing to move away. Finding on Issue 1 your arrest for obstruction was lawful but unnecessary. Issue 2, was the force police used during your arrest reasonable and justified? 22. You complain that Sergeant Tuazeno punched you in the head and eye-gouged you. You also complain that Constable Jones hit you around your ribs/torso with a wooden pole. Examine these alleged uses of force separately below. 23. It is important that we set out the general context which informed Sergeant Tuazeno's assessment of risks and threats. He is an experienced officer with public order policing training. He had been part of the policing operation for the protest since February 13. On February 22 he had been on duty since about 5 a.m. and was in charge of a team of 7 officers. 24. His team was one of only 2 units that had shields. They became involved more when the car had been driven at the police line. Officers were directed to quickly return to Parliament grounds via Hill Street. Officers started down Molesworth Street, which is when the officer was shoulder charged and knocked to the ground by a protester. These 2 incidents happened in quick succession and changed the environment faced by police, as Sergeant Tuazeno and other officers confirmed to us. 25. Sergeant Tuazeno explained. From the moment that car drove down, my colleague getting knocked over, I believed at that time that the threat was high, and I believed that it was assaultive, so anyone I deemed and identified as being not moving, I just regarded that as a threat. 26. In interview, Sergeant Tuazeno expanded on this. The protesters have gone from being abusive to being hostile, aggressive, assaultive, as well as having weapons. With my assessment of the current situation of a random vehicle being attempted to drive into defenseless police staff, to see my colleague being shoulder barged, I feared for the safety of all police staff from that point forward. 27. The Crimes Act 1961 provides legal justification for using force, including overcoming force used to resist arrest, Section 39, or in defense of themselves or another person, Section 48. Uses of force by Sergeant Tuazeno. 28. Sergeant Tuazeno accepts punching you once but denies eye-gouging you. He accepts he did use force during your arrest and justified his uses of force under both Sections 39 and 48. He accepts gripping you around the head to pull you from the line and punching once after you had punched him. 29. Sergeant Tuazeno described his uses of force in a report he completed on February 27, 2022. I reached forward to effect the arrest. He moved back slightly to avoid me. I used my left hand to distract his line of sight and grip the back of his head and pull him towards me. He immediately began to pull his head away. He lunged forward into me while using his left hand to strike my left arm away. The male continued pushing me back and threw a right punch to my left eye. In self-defense, I struck him with a closed right hand fist to his right side of his face while he was trying to pull away and get back into the crowd. 30. The footage we have reviewed does not accord with Sergeant Tuazeno's description of events. We have identified 3 uses of force by Sergeant Tuazeno which we examine separately. 1. Reaching through the line and using his right fist to hit/punch you to the left side of your head as described at paragraph 13H. 2. Reaching through the line and his left hand making contact with your eye area before pulling you from the line as described at paragraph 13J. 3. Punching you several times in the stomach region as described in paragraph 13M. 31. Section 39 of the Crimes Act 1961 empowers police to use such force as may be necessary to overcome any force used in resisting an arrest or the execution of any sentence, warrant, or process. Necessary force in this context is generally accepted as meaning reasonable and proportionate to the degree of force being used to resist. 32. Section 48 provides that any person, including a police officer, is legally justified in using reasonable force in defense of themselves or another. For an officer to rely on this, their actions must be assessed against the following 3 questions. What did the officer believe the circumstances were at the time? Was the officer acting in defense of themselves or others? Were their actions reasonable in the circumstances as they believed them to be? 3. Sergeant Tuazeno's first use of force when he reached through the line was to arrest you. He accepts he went to grab you as he attempted to get you around the head and pull you from the line of protesters. When shown the footage, he accepted his right fist connected twice with the left side of your head. You were standing with other protesters and not being violent or aggressive to police or anyone else. As such, there was no lawful basis under Section 39 for Sergeant Tuazeno to use any force. You were not using force to resist arrest. At most you were uncooperative and pulling away. 3-4. The second use of force occurred less than 10 seconds later when Sergeant Tuazeno reached in again and made contact with your eye area. At this stage he then put his hand around your head and pulled you from the crowd. Sergeant Tuazeno does not believe his thumb went into your eye. He says there was no deliberate action on his part, his hand kept moving. He was attempting to control your head and remove you from the line of protesters. If contact was made with your eye area there was no force or pressure on his part. Again, you are not using any force in resisting arrest and so there is no lawful basis under Section 39 for Sergeant Tuazeno to use any force at this stage. 35 Sergeant Tuazeno says this use of force and his third use of force, which was the later punch, were in defense of himself and other officers. We therefore will examine what actions he took and whether these were lawful and reasonable using the 3 questions outlined above. What did Sergeant Tuazeno believe the circumstances to be at the time? 36 As outlined above, see paragraphs 25 and 26. Sergeant Tuazeno generally felt the situation was high risk and he feared for the safety of all officers after a car had been driven at the police line and an officer's shoulder charged to the ground. 37 He told us that after officers formed a safe haven to protect the fallen officer, he saw protesters kick and gun throwing punches continuously at police. He identified an email line particular being you, as one of the main instigators. He says he had observed you earlier fighting off police and made a decision to arrest you when the right opportunity arose. 38 He defined fighting as getting physical, pushing, and lunging at shields. He could not explain what he saw you do that morning, when or where any action occurred. He could not identify any action in the footage which showed you being aggressive or fighting in any way. 39 He completed his use of force report on February 27, 5 days after the incident. He would have been aware that the incident involving you had been widely reported in the media. We would have expected Sergeant Tuazeno to fully record what you had done and why he believed you were a main instigator. In fact, the report, and his account at interview, was more about the general situation than you specifically. When pushed he was not able to describe in any detail what he saw you do. When asked if there were others doing the same thing, he said there were lots of people and lots happening, but you came to his notice at the time. He could not say when he first noticed you. He could not explain what you had been doing specifically to draw his attention and decide to arrest you. He could not answer what threat you posed and why he needed to use force on you. He reiterated that he saw the whole incident as high threat and anybody who did not follow police instructions as being obstructive and a threat. 40 At the time he leaned into the line of protesters for the second time to reach you, Sergeant Tuazeno says there was general fighting from protesters, including you. His face mask had been ripped off in the melee. You were fighting with an officer in front of Sergeant Tuazeno and had grabbed that officer's shield. This officer was grabbed and pulled into the crowd. The officer disappeared, which Sergeant Tuazeno was very worried about. 41 Sergeant Tuazeno says he needed to act quickly to arrest you, which involved using force to remove you from the area and protect his colleague. 42 You then lunged forward towards Sergeant Tuazeno and used your left hand to strike Sergeant Tuazeno's arm away, in an attempt to break free. This made Sergeant Tuazeno feel like he was going to fall backwards onto the ground. He tried to hold you as well as prevent himself from falling backwards. Once Sergeant Tuazeno managed to get his balance back, he said he felt you punch him with a closed right fist and tried to pull away from you. This is when he used force for the third time and struck you with a closed fist to your right eye. He says you were trying to pull away and get back into the crowd of protesters. 43 Sergeant Tuazeno feared for himself and was worried about the officer who had been pulled into the crowd. He says that these circumstances lead to his use of force on the third occasion. 44 We accept that the situation was dynamic and that 2 instances had occurred in quick succession which generally caused police concern and elevated risks. These were the car driving at police and the officer being shoulder charged to the ground. Sergeant Tuazeno saw both incidents and factored those into his general assessment. 45 However, we do not accept that Sergeant Tuazeno at the time he used force on you for the second time believed that you were assaultive, a main instigator of the protesters and the fighting on that day, and thus were an imminent threat to him. This is for the following reasons. A. Sergeant Tuazeno could not provide any details of what he had seen you do prior to being at the portable toilets, where or when any actions occurred. B. Sergeant Tuazeno could not point to any such actions from the various pieces of footage he had seen since the incident. C. Sergeant Tuazeno has only provided a general conclusion of his overall assessment of all protesters rather than identified any specific and imminent threat he believed you posed. 46. We do accept that at the time he used force for the third time and punched you, this was after you had lunged at him. At this stage he believed you were going to continue to be violent towards him. 47. We do not believe Sergeant Tuazeno's recollection is affected by the passage of time. He completed his report on his use of force 5 days after the incident and did not tell us when we interviewed him that he had forgotten events at all. Was Sergeant Tuazeno acting in defense of themselves or others? 48. When he used force for the second time, reaching through the line to pull you out with his left hand making contact with your eye area, this was a preemptive action to arrest you. Sergeant Tuazeno was not taking this action to protect either himself or others. 49. When he used force for the third time and punched you, this was in response to you lunging at him and punching him. Sergeant Tuazeno was acting at this time to protect himself. Were Sergeant Tuazeno's actions reasonable in the circumstances as he believed them to be? 50. Sergeant Tuazeno's second use of force was not in defense of himself or anybody else. At the time you were in front of the portable toilets. You were not violent but were angry at police. You and others were attempting to protect that area and you were not complying with instructions to move away and fall back. Your arm was on an officer's shield but not aggressively. 51. Sergeant Tuazeno denies eye-gouging you or putting any pressure on or around your eyes. He says he was reaching around your neck and head to pull you from the line and arrest you. 52. Having assessed all the material, interviews, and review of the different pieces of footage, we have concluded that when Sergeant Tuazeno reached through the line with his left arm, his open hand came into contact with your right eye area. His hand dropped down, then returned to the eye area where Sergeant Tuazeno's left thumb entered your eye socket, exerting pressure causing your eyebrow to lift. Sergeant Tuazeno then pulled you from the line. 53. This use of force was preemptive and not in defense of himself or another officer. Further, it appears more likely that Sergeant Tuazeno's actions in breaking the police line to get at you has isolated the officer to his right, making him vulnerable to being dragged into the crowd. 54. This use of force is excessive. You were seen by a paramedic at Wellington Central Police Station. They recorded you had significant swelling to our eye socket. Difficult to assess pupil due to swelling shut. Bleeding to white of pupil. Blurred vision in affected eye before swelling shut. Large contusion to L forehead. Bruising to nose, self-resolved epistaxis. Grazes to L elbow and pain to R wrist. Pain to generalized face and R eye. 55. The third use of force was when Sergeant Tuazeno punched you several times in the stomach region after you had lunged at him and hit him. This was done in self-defense and his actions were reasonable and proportionate to the threat you posed to him at that time. All the force Sergeant Tuazeno used on you prior to this was excessive. Use of force by Constable Jones. 56. You allege Constable Jones hit you with a wooden pole/stick just under your ribs which caused a welt. Constable Jones accepts he used some force to assist Sergeant Tuazeno to restrain you and effect the arrest. He states he did not hit you with a pole. 57. You will see at paragraph 13m that we have established from our review of the footage that Constable Jones dropped the pole/stick before engaging with you. 58. Constable Jones completed a report on February 24, 2022 setting out what occurred. He recorded that he saw a pole on the ground near the police/protest line and picked it up to make sure it was not used against police. He assisted in restraining you by grabbing you, pulling you to the ground, pushing you onto your stomach and controlling you there until you were handcuffed. 59. He saw Sergeant Tuazeno having trouble with you. He recorded Peters had been requested by multiple police staff to move off the road as he was blocking a public access way, and if he refused to move, he would be arrested for obstruction. I noticed Peters pushing back at Sergeant Tuazeno and trying to grab his police vest. I then witnessed Sergeant Tuazeno and Peters begin to grapple/wrestle and Peters charge at Sergeant Tuazeno, resulting in them both being pushed back between the police line. I then witnessed Peters attempt to strike Sergeant Tuazeno in the head with a cell phone which he was holding in his right hand. 60. He was aware that Sergeant Tuazeno was trying to arrest you and saw you lunge at him. Constable Jones went to assist with your arrest. Steps he took were standard ones and justified under Section 39, as by this stage you had used force upon Sergeant Tuazeno and Constable Jones reasonably believed you were forcefully resisting arrest. Issue 3. Did Sergeant Tuazeno steal your phone? 61. You say you had your cell phone in your hand for most the time, and this can be seen in the footage we have reviewed. You started to record events as they evolved. 62. Your phone dropped to the ground as you grappled with Sergeant Tuazeno, and you believe he took it and lied about this to ensure the footage you had recorded would not be available. 63. Sergeant Tuazeno denies taking your phone. 64. There is footage showing an officer nearby seeing something on the ground and handing this to Sergeant Tuazeno, who attaches this to his upper vest area. 65. Sergeant Tuazeno explained to us that when he was on the ground you grabbed his police radio cord and pulled it while thrashing about. His radio was dislodged, and he was given this by another officer and put it away. This is what is seen on the footage. 66. We cannot conclude that the footage shows Sergeant Tuazeno taking your phone. The explanation he provides is reasonable. 67. Police investigated your complaint and reported to you on July 20, 2023 that the allegations were not upheld. You will gather from the contents of our letter that we do not agree with the police analysis of the events. 68. In summary, we conclude that your arrest was lawful although unnecessary, and the initial 2 uses of force by Sergeant Tuazeno were unlawful and excessive. He did make contact with your eye and exert pressure which caused you injury. The last use of force was in self-defense, as he responded to your actions. We consider your actions were understandable as you were reacting to unprovoked and unjustified assaults on you. 69. We have, today, also written to the Commissioner of Police to advise him of the outcome of your complaint. He will be provided with a copy of this letter. Yours sincerely, Judge Kenneth Johnston, KC, Chair, Independent Police Conduct Authority.